On January 14, 1860, an auction clerk in Mobile, Alabama, wrote one sentence in the margin of a slave sale ledger that should not have been date, male, about 30 years old, sound body, price, $375. Then, underneath the price in smaller handwriting, he added, purchaser warned. Previous bids withdrawn after examination of the packet. That packet was the reason every buyer in the room had stepped back. 17 pages, 3 sworn statements, 2 shipping notes, 1 minister's letter, and a set of calculations copied from a plantation account book, all tied with red thread and stored behind the bill of sale. The man being sold was called Isaiah Reed. That was not his birth name. No one in the room knew his birth name, but everyone who had handled him agreed on one thing. He could remember every word he heard. He could read a book once and recite it years later. He could calculate crop yields, river distances, debt interest, and cargo weights faster than trained clerks could write the numbers down. He spoke English, French, Spanish, enough Latin to argue scripture with a minister, and enough German to correct a ship captain's log. In 1860 Alabama, that did not make him valuable. It made him dangerous, because Isaiah's mind did not just make him smarter than the men trying to sell him. It made the entire lie beneath slavery visible. And that was why, on a cold January morning, a healthy man in his prime stood on an auction block, while buyers whispered, folded their arms, and refused to raise their hands. The clerk who wrote the note was named Nathaniel Cole. Cole had worked the mobile markets for 12 years. He knew the language of human commerce so well that he could say sound teeth, strong shoulders, an obedient disposition without feeling the words anymore. He knew how buyers looked at hands, how they watched posture, how they asked about scars, punishments, skills, escapes, and illnesses. He knew what a strong field hand should bring in January. $900 if the bidding was slow, $1,100. If 2 planters wanted the same man, sometimes more. So when Isaiah arrived from New Orleans with a warning packet tied to his sale papers, Cole thought it was a trick. A seller lowering expectations, a broker covering himself, a way to explain some defect that did not show on the body. Then Cole interviewed him. The interview was supposed to last 5 minutes. It lasted nearly an hour. Cole asked the usual questions first. Age, origin, prior work, skills, punishments. Isaiah answered with a calmness that felt neither submissive nor defiant. He said he did not know where he had been born. He remembered a tobacco yard in Virginia, a rice mill near the Carolina coast, a lawyer's kitchen in New Orleans, and 2 riverboats. But before that there was only darkness. Cole made a note. Then he asked the question that mattered. Can you read? Isaiah looked at the ink bottle on the desk before answering. Yes, sir. How did you learn? By watching. Isaiah said. Letters repeat. Sounds repeat. Men think their books are silent when a servant stands in the room. They are not. Cole stopped writing. The answer was too precise, too composed, too much like something a lawyer might say if he wanted to make a point without raising his voice. So Cole opened one of the shipping notices from the packet and pushed it across the desk. Read this. Isaiah read it aloud perfectly. Then Cole took the paper back and turned it face down. What was the second line? Isaiah recited the second line, then the third, then the whole page. Not approximately, not from memory in the ordinary way, word for word, even the spelling error in the captain's name. Cole tried arithmetic next. A freight invoice, 6 columns, cotton weights, dockage charges, insurance, commission, interest over 46 days. Cole had the answer on a separate page. Isaiah listened once, then said the total is wrong by $8.12. Cole checked. The total was wrong, not Isaiah's answer, the invoice. That was when Cole finally read the packet. The first statement came from a Virginia planter named Abner Wills, who had owned Isaiah for 14 months. Wills wrote that he had bought Isaiah as a field hand, only to discover that the new man learned every task after watching it once, not quickly, once. He could prune tobacco by sight, repair a broken press after seeing the gears exposed, identify a crop disease from a description given through a kitchen doorway. Wills tested him with an agricultural journal. He let Isaiah see one page for less than a minute. 3 days later, Isaiah recited the page back to him, including a footnote on soil lime. Will's letter grew stranger from there. Isaiah had warned that one low field would rot if planted early, because the clay held water too long after spring rain. The overseer ignored him. The seedlings failed. Isaiah predicted that a hired carpenter had undermeasured the beams for a new curing shed because the roof line would not carry the intended load. The carpenter laughed. The roof sagged before autumn. Will's ended with a sentence that explained why he sold him. I cannot keep a man in bondage who sees the workings of my property better than I do, and whose presence causes others to notice the same. The second statement came from a New Orleans cotton factor named Charles Duval. Duval had kept Isaiah in his warehouse office for only 6 weeks. He intended to use him for lifting bales and sweeping floors. Instead, he discovered that Isaiah could understand the cotton trade after listening to clerks for 2 days. Isaiah corrected an exchange rate calculation. He spotted duplicate charges on a warehouse bill. He predicted that a shipment bound for Havana had been overloaded because the hull sat too low on the port side. Duval wrote, each correction was profitable. Each correction also made him more intolerable to own. The third statement was from a river captain named Elias Broussard. Broussard wrote that fog had trapped his steamboat between 2 bends of the lower Mississippi. The pilot believed they had drifted less than a mile from the channel. Isaiah, chained with other cargo near the freight deck, said they had drifted nearly 3. He had counted time by bell, estimated current by vibration against the hull, and tracked direction by the angle of the boat's turn before the fog thickened. The captain checked by soundings. Isaiah was right, to within a few hundred yards. Broussard's last line was not a business warning. It was almost a confession. A man like that should be standing over a chart, not under a lock. By the time Nathaniel Cole finished reading, he understood why the packet existed. It was not praise, it was evidence. Every owner wanted the next owner to understand the risk. Not that Isaiah might run, not that he might fight, but that he might think too clearly. And clear thought was the one thing slavery could not survive in the open. The auction room filled before noon. Planters came in from the Alabama River counties, cotton men from Mississippi, merchants from Mobile. A few buyers had heard rumors about Lot 28 before the sale even began. That helped at first. Rumor always draws men close. Then Cole distributed copies of the packet summary, and the room changed. Men who had joked in the doorway grew quiet. One buyer asked if the testimonies were forged. Cole said the signatures had been verified by the broker. Another asked if Isaiah had ever shown violence. Cole said no. A third asked the real question. If he knows all this, why has no one kept him? No one answered because everyone already knew. At 1 o'clock, Isaiah was brought to the platform. He wore a plain coat too thin for the weather and shoes that did not quite fit. He stood straight, not proud, not broken, still. That stillness disturbed the room more than anger would have. Anger could be punished. Stillness had to be interpreted. Cole began at $700. No hands rose. He lowered to $600, then $5. A man in the second row lifted his fingers halfway, then lowered them when Isaiah turned his head and looked at him. Not threatening, just looking. $400, still nothing. At $375, a hand finally rose. It belonged to Thomas Harrow, owner of Briarfield, a cotton plantation 40 miles above Mobile. Harrow was 42 years old, rich enough to appear modest, and proud of being called a practical man. He did not gamble. He did not buy sick stock. He did not trust rumors, but he loved a bargain when every other man was too frightened to touch it. Cole struck the gavel. Sold. Afterward, Cole handed Harrow the packet. Harrow did not take it. I have read enough, he said. Cole lowered his voice. Then you understand the warning. Harrow smiled. I understand that men with weaker nerves have mistaken an asset for a threat. Cole said nothing. He only wrote the final note in the ledger. Purchaser warned. Previous bids withdrawn after examination of the packet. Then he watched Thomas Harrow take Isaiah Reed away in chains. Briarfield was not the largest plantation in the county, but it was one of the most admired. 4,000 acres, 96 enslaved people, a gin house, 2 barns, a smokehouse, a carriage shed, and a white-column main house that looked peaceful from the river road if you did not count the cabins behind it. Harrow believed in order. He kept ledgers on everything: seed weight, rainfall, yield per acre, sick days, tool replacement, punishment records, credit notes. He liked numbers because numbers seemed clean. Numbers did not ask whether the wealth they measured had come from human suffering. At least, not until Isaiah arrived. At first, Harrow was careful. He assigned Isaiah to light work near the main house, then brought him into the study after supper and tested him privately. A multiplication problem, a Latin verse, a page from a law digest, a passage from a medical book, a column of cotton prices from 3 ports. Isaiah answered everything, not eagerly, not with pride, as if the knowledge were simply there, waiting to be reached. Harrow told himself he was thrilled, and for a few weeks he was. He had purchased a mind the market had underpriced, a living calculating engine, a private advisor no rival could hire. By February, Isaiah was reviewing Briarfield's accounts. By March, Harrow was consulting him on planting schedules. By April, Isaiah had found 3 costly mistakes in the plantation books, 1 drainage problem in a south field, and a pattern of inflated charges from supplier Harrow had trusted for years. So was the unease, because every useful answer widened the same wound. Harrow owned the man who was teaching him how his own estate worked. At first, he hid the arrangement from his overseer, Caleb Pike. Then Pike noticed that Harrow stopped making decisions before calling Isaiah to the study. He noticed that planting orders came with a precision Harrow had never shown. He noticed that when Isaiah spoke, Harrow listened. And once the enslaved workers noticed too, the damage could not be contained. The first change was silence. Not the old silence of fear, a different silence, a watchful one. People saw Isaiah enter the master's study with shackled wrists and come out with the next week's instructions in Harrow's handwriting. They saw a man treated as property give advice that shaped the property's future. They did not need Isaiah to preach. His existence did the preaching for him. One woman in the laundry yard, Ruth, said it quietly to another. If he can know all that and still be called a thing, then the word thing never meant what they said it meant. By late spring, Harrow had begun losing sleep. He would sit with Isaiah after dark under the yellow light of an oil lamp and ask questions that had nothing to do with cotton, Rome, scripture, navigation, law, memory, whether thought belonged to the soul or the body. Isaiah answered carefully. He never forgot the danger in a room, but he also never pretended ignorance. That was his burden. He could survive by being quiet. He could not survive by becoming false. One night, after a long discussion about property law, Harrow closed the book and said, "You understand contracts better than most attorneys I know." Isaiah did not answer. Harrow leaned back. "Do you understand what that does to me?" "Yes, sir," Isaiah said. The answer angered him, not because it was insolent, because it was accurate. "What does it do?" Isaiah looked at the lamp flame. "It makes plain what the law tries to hide." Harrow's face changed. Isaiah waited. "You ask me, sir. I am asking now. The law calls me property, but it must also fear my reading of law. It calls me inferior, but it must forbid my education. It calls my bondage natural, but it requires patrols, chains, ledgers, courts, and guns to keep it in place. If a thing needs that much force to appear natural, it is not natural." Harrow stood so fast his chair struck the wall. For one moment Isaiah thought he had gone too far. But Harrow did not call Pike. He did not reach for a whip. He walked to the window and stared toward the dark cabins beyond the kitchen yard. The conversation ended there. But the plantation did not return to what it had been. A truth, once spoken cleanly, has a way of remaining in the room after both men leave. 3 days later, Pike found a torn anti-slavery pamphlet hidden behind a loose brick near the wash house. It had passed through at least 6 hands. No one admitted ownership. Pike brought it to Harrow, expecting fury. Instead, Harrow read the pamphlet alone. Every sentence sounded like an echo of Isaiah's voice. Not because Isaiah had copied it, because Isaiah had already made the argument unavoidable. That afternoon, Harrow called Isaiah into the study. The pamphlet lay on the desk. "You have seen this?" "Yes, sir." "You know what possession of this can bring?" "Yes, sir." "Do you agree with it?" Isaiah looked at the page, then at Harrow. "I agree that no man should own another." Harrow's jaw tightened. "And what should I do with that answer?" "That depends on whether you wanted truth or comfort." The next morning, Thomas Harrow sent for a lawyer from Mobile. The lawyer arrived 4 days later. His name was Edwin Sloan, and he had spent 20 years making slavery look orderly on paper. Bills of sale, estate transfers, manumission documents. Rarely, when Harrow told him what he wanted, Sloan assumed he had misunderstood. "You want to free him?" "Yes." "The one you purchased in January?" "Yes." "Has he become unmanageable?" Harrow laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Quite the opposite. Sloan set his pen down. "Then sell him. You may recover more than you paid." "I cannot." "Cannot legally? Cannot morally." The room tightened around the word, morally. In a plantation study, that word was more dangerous than any pamphlet. Sloan warned him. Freeing one enslaved man was allowed under restrictions, but it would be talked about. Freeing a man because of his intelligence would be worse. It would suggest that bondage depended on a lie, and if one man's mind could expose the lie, then every mind still held in bondage became evidence waiting to be seen. Harrow listened, then signed the papers anyway. On June 2nd, 1860, Isaiah Reed received a folded document, $20 in coin, and a warning. Under Alabama law and local custom, freedom did not mean safety. He would need to leave quickly, move north, avoid patrols. Trust no one who asked too many questions about his papers. Isaiah held the document with both hands. For the first time since Harrow had known him, his composure cracked. Only slightly, a breath, a blink too long. Then he asked one question, and the others. Harrow had prepared for gratitude. He had not prepared for that. Isaiah continued softly. "Ruth in the laundry, Benjamin at the gin, the children in the quarters. Are they less human because their minds do not frighten you?" Harrow could not answer, because the question was not an accusation. It was arithmetic. One freed man, 95 still enslaved. No moral ledger could make that balance. "I do not know how to do more," Harrow said. Isaiah folded the papers. "Then this freedom is real," he said, "but it is not complete." He left Briarfield before dawn. No farewell, no scene. Just a man walking down a road with legal papers in his coat and the full memory of bondage inside his head. The effect on Briarfield was immediate. By sunrise, everyone knew. No overseer announced it. No bell rang. The knowledge moved faster than orders. Isaiah had been freed because Harrow could no longer pretend not to see him. That was the part people understood. And once they understood it, the plantation's old language lost force. Property, obedience, natural order, servant master, all of it began to sound like words trying to hold back a flood. Ruth said it plainly in the laundry yard. He saw one man and could not keep lying. Maybe now he knows what he has done to the rest. Pike sensed the change before Harrow did. Tools vanished. Work slowed. People asked questions in tones that were still polite, but no longer empty. Nothing rose high enough to punish without admitting fear. Everything was just enough to show that obedience had become thinner. Harrow tried to continue. For 2 weeks, he lasted. Then he called Sloan back. This time he asked for a plan to convert Briarfield from slavery to paid labor over 5 years. Not cleanly, not heroically, not with the courage to lose everything at once, but with enough moral movement to terrify his neighbors. Word spread through the county within days. Planters who had dined at Harrow's table stopped visiting. Merchants delayed shipments. A bank in Mobile called in a note that had never troubled him before. A cousin wrote that Harrow was embarrassing the family. Pike resigned. Then the assistant overseer resigned. Then half the crop went unmanaged because no one wanted to be employed by a man suspected of sympathy with abolition. By autumn, Briarfield was still standing, but the illusion of order was gone. Harrow's ledgers became useless. They could measure cotton, seed, debt, and rain. They could not measure what it cost a man to discover the truth too late. Meanwhile, Isaiah moved north through a country that recognized freedom on paper more easily than in flesh. In Cincinnati, he found work first on the docks, then in a freight office, where a Quaker merchant named Samuel Klein discovered that the quiet black clerk could solve shipping problems that had stalled white bookkeepers for days. Klein did not know what to do with him. No one did. To call Isaiah a clerk was dishonest. To call him an equal partner was impossible in the society around them, so Isaiah occupied the narrow space America offered him. Useful, hidden, paid but underpaid, trusted but not fully acknowledged, he recalculated freight routes, detected fraud in warehouse accounts, memorized safe addresses for fugitives moving toward Canada. When the Civil War began, he quietly assisted Union supply officers with rail timings, ration projections, and river transport problems. His work saved time, possibly lives. Most of it appeared under other men's names. Isaiah understood the pattern perfectly. In slavery, his intelligence had threatened the claim that black people were fit for bondage. In freedom, the same intelligence threatened the claim that black people were fit only for lesser citizenship. The cage had changed shape. It had not vanished. He wrote at night, not for publication at first, for record, for sanity, because perfect memory is not only a gift, it is also a prison that keeps every humiliation fresh. One notebook entry, dated October 1862, read, "I was freed because I was difficult to deny, but no man should need to be difficult to deny. Humanity should not have to prove itself by arithmetic, languages, or memory. The weakest-minded bondage has the same claim to liberty as the strongest. If my life proves anything, it is not that intelligence makes a man worthy of freedom. It proves that freedom should never have depended on someone else being forced to notice the mind at all." Harrow lost Briarfield in 1863. Debt, isolation, and war finished what conscience had started. The gradual freedom plan died when the plantation was sold. Some of the people promised liberty escaped before transfer. Some were moved deeper into the Confederate interior. Some vanished from the record entirely. That was one of the cruelties Isaiah never stopped naming. A moral awakening inside one owner did not break a system. It only exposed how hard the system would fight to survive. Years later, after emancipation, Harrow wrote Isaiah a letter from a rented room in Mobile. The handwriting was weak. The pride was gone. He asked whether the Freedom Papers had carried him safely north. He admitted that he had failed the others. He said he did not know whether his attempt mattered, because Briarfield had fallen, and the people he meant to free had been scattered. Isaiah answered, "Not with forgiveness cheap enough to comfort a dying man, not with condemnation simple enough to end the matter, with truth." He wrote that Harrow's action had mattered because it changed one life absolutely. He wrote that it had failed because one life was not justice. He wrote that slavery's deepest corruption was not only that it stole labor, but that it trained the enslaver to recognize humanity only when it became impossible to ignore. And then he wrote the line that survived in a family bundle for decades before anyone understood its weight. "You freed me when my mind became too visible to deny." The work of a just world is to see the person before proof is demanded. Isaiah lived into the 1890s. In public records, he appeared mostly as a minor clerk, a shipping assistant, a colored resident of Cincinnati, unmarried, literate, respectable. Those words made him small enough for the page. They left out the rest: the auction packet, the calculations, the river estimates, the plantation ledgers he corrected, the freedom routes he carried in memory, the Union officers who used his mind while refusing to name it, the owner who lost his estate after one enslaved man made the lie too clear to keep. For decades, Isaiah Reed existed in fragments: a margin note in Mobile, a lawyer's copy of Manumission papers, a merchant's private account, 2 wartime references with no public credit, a thin obituary that did not know what it was burying. But fragments can still accuse. They ask why a man had to be extraordinary before his humanity became undeniable. They ask what happens to all the ordinary brilliance that slavery buried without record. They ask how many minds were never discovered because the system that owned them needed them unread, unheard, and unseen. Isaiah's story is not important because he was the most intelligent man in the room. It is important because he should not have needed to be. His memory did not make him human. His calculations did not make him human. His languages did not make him human. They only forced certain men to confront what had been true before he ever opened a book, solved a sum, or stepped onto an auction block. He was human when the ledger priced him, human when the buyers feared him, human when Harrow owned him, human when Freedom Papers finally said what law had spent a lifetime refusing to admit. The packet tied with red thread was never proof of Isaiah's humanity. It was proof of everyone else's failure to see it, and that is the part no ledger could keep buried.